Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Lino Rodriguez Fermented Honey Processed Colombia from Aviary Coffee. And there's the box right there. And Aviary, based out of Cleveland, Ohio. And this is their second ever appearance on this channel, unless you want to count their original release, the Brian Blast, which is also a coffee that we had previously reviewed on this channel. In that case, this would make this their third ever appearance on this channel. And a lot of people do ask us why we don't review more Aviary coffees, and the answer is very simple. Their coffees usually sell out too fast for us to actually get them. That being said, Aviary seemed to have significantly more of this coffee, so we were able to finally get our second coffee from them, and it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 51. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Aviary's recipe, which is a very loose recipe. The only thing they have on that is a 17:1 water to coffee ratio. So we opted for that with our standard temperature at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this one. So I did find out that Aviary also released a 2 light version of this coffee as well. This one is just the standard profile, which did turn out a fair bit lighter than a lot of the other American-based coffee roasters out there. I've heard some comparisons with some of the slightly more developed, the Bicky Chemist coffees out there, which I can certainly see. So more of the Omni Roast, I think that's what they have them labeled as now. So that being said, these are some very light coffees. I've even seen some color meter readings of Aviary's coffees also skewing on the lighter side of things. So all of that's to say that this coffee is very light by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 23, first impression through the V60, and a little bit of the processing can be felt, but it wasn't in an overly heavy sense, as going into this coffee, I was a little concerned given that it is a processed Colombian coffee, and even honey processed Colombian coffees don't usually turn out as clean as I would like. That being said, it did have a little bit of that right-off brew, but outside of that, I would say it still skewed on the cleaner side of things, with plenty of tropical and citric bright qualities, as well as plenty of intensity. So it was a decent start overall, a fair bit of that Colombian berry-like feel to it, but for the most part, I would say it was mostly in line with expectations. Day 26 through the Chemex, and the coffee was significantly better today, as it does have better cleanliness with the earlier Colombian berry aspect significantly toned down in place of a significantly more sweet experience, primarily in a caramelized and sugary sense as well. More citric qualities as the coffee has plenty of brightness yet again, so this was a much better second impression this time around. Day 29 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee was nice again, as it's slightly grainy off brew, which does lend itself a little bit towards the profile of this coffee being on the lighter side of things. It does cool down very well into another sweet and bright experience, with the listed blood orange being the most pronounced quality this time around. Otherwise, a slight bit of a vanilla-like sweetness to go with a very long-lasting sugary quality once again. And it's at this moment I said to myself, this coffee is just very, very sweet, which is going to be a really nice selling point to me on this one. I was definitely enjoying the sweetness that we had experienced as of this moment. Day 32 through the V60 with Aviary's recipe, so just a simple adjustment from 16:1 to 17:1, and it did help the coffee a little bit, as it feels like it has improved a little with time. Citric quality continues to stand out, mostly in the cool down and finish, as there are plenty of floral tea-like qualities at the forefront, but also plenty of sugary sweetness on the back end yet again, so a lot of positives to take away, plenty of depth in this coffee as well. Day 35 through the Chemex with Aviary's recipe, and it's another good day as off brew. It's initially a little bit tame, but there's more room for this coffee to be pushed, at least that's the way it felt. As it cools down, it greatly opens up in terms of the sweetness, with an almost Cadbury cream-like egg sweetness, and for the majority of the time that I was working with this coffee, I continuously came back to that descriptor, as I felt that that sugary sweetness that was presented within this one was just very reminiscent of that specific quality for me. Excellent intensity all around, as there's a very enjoyable sweet citric quality to go alongside that as well, and given that this coffee just offered so many sweeter attributes to it, I was definitely enjoying those qualities to it. Day 38 through the V60 with the same recipe and a slightly more fine grind, and interestingly enough, it didn't seem to matter. Adjusting the grind setting, which is usually a pretty big adjustment, didn't really seem to change the coffee too much, as it's been very consistent regardless. The majority of the Colombian berry qualities do come right off brew, so it does have a little bit of that, and I think they had a pomegranate note listed on here. Makes a lot of sense. A lot of the more dark berry qualities are stuff that I get from Colombian coffees. Even washed Colombian coffees still seem to have a lot of those. It does remain reminiscent of what I would describe as being that Cadbury cream egg or even a honeycomb cereal, as there's an abundance of sweetness and a very prominent orange brightness to it as well. So a lot of depth to this coffee, great sweetness once again, and we'll go ahead and move on to day 41 as we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee has been pretty consistent, so even going a little bit more fine on the grind didn't really seem to change the coffee too much, as it has a very prominent candied sweetness in a very direct sense yet again. And then day 44, final notes we have through the V60 with Aviary's recipe once again, and the coffee continues to offer a pretty sweet and intense experience with a bit more of the Colombian berry / listed pomegranate quality at the forefront before cooling down into a nice citric aspect. But there's also an interesting florality that's slightly reminiscent of what I would describe as Panamanian geishas with the cereal-like aspect to it. So I did mention honeycomb cereal at one point, and outside of that, the immense cleanliness to it and that slight grain quality also gave it some additional depth, making this a very interesting experience. For anybody that doesn't know, this is also a geisha coffee, which is possibly one of the reasons why we did experience that quality to it. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. Let's go through those. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. Going into it, I was just a little concerned that maybe more of the heavier Colombian qualities of this one could hinder that overall experience, but no, this one was very clean. I had no issues with the cleanliness whatsoever. Even the slightly heavier berry qualities on the first experience, and that can be a little more prominent right off brew, didn't hinder this coffee whatsoever, especially as it did cool down. You were getting two vastly different experiences, and the cleanliness was very high on this one. So happy with it being there at the level 4, very clean coffee, even for it being a Colombian geisha. Finish, level 4. I really appreciated the finish of this coffee too, mostly because it just offered such varying depths on different days. So some days it was a little bit more sugary, some days it was a little bit more citric, some days it was a little bit more bright, and even at times it had that slight cereal quality to it. So I really appreciated that about this coffee. Finish was ever changing, as this coffee offered a lot of depth in general. Sweetness, level 4. And truth be told, it's actually on the higher side of the level 4. Probably the most important takeaway I did have from this coffee was this sweetness, which is something I'll discuss a little bit more, but this was super, super sweet. And I could probably justify it being there at the level 5 mark, as it's definitely on the higher side of the level 4. A lot of sugariness to it, as I do believe they had a brown sugar note listed. Made a lot of sense given just how intense that quality was to this coffee. Acidity, level 4. I think I'd heard a lot of people mention that the acidity to this one was also pretty high for them, especially in terms of the citric qualities to it. And I can certainly see that more processed Colombian coffees can't have that uneven brightness, but the brightness in this one was pretty well balanced to go along with the rest of it. I mean, given how many level 4s we have, it just goes to show how well balanced this coffee was in general. So plenty of brightness to it, giving it some additional depth. Florality, level 4, and I can't quite recall what sort of floral notes they did have listed on here, but I can see a little bit more of a citric floral quality to this one as well. And I did mention that it had a little bit of a Panamanian geisha feel at times, so a little bit of that floral citric grain quality to it. So level 4, where we opted to put it, some really enjoyable floral components to this one. I think they maybe had something along the lines of like an orange blossom or a coffee blossom, but I could have that completely wrong. Let's go ahead and move on. Berry fruit, level 4. And seeing the pomegranate note on here was a little bit of a red flag, but I'm very happy with the way that it actually translated into this coffee, because it's present at the forefront, but it's not particularly heavy enough to hinder the overall experience of this coffee. I don't particularly like the darker berry aspects to Colombian coffees, so having it be there in a little bit more fleeting of a sense, but still pronounced enough to give this coffee some additional depth, is just a very well appreciated quality to this one. Citrus fruit, level 4, and I heard some people mention that the most abundant quality they experienced from this coffee was a very strong citric component to it. And once again, I believe that they had maybe like a blood orange was one of the notes they had listed on here. Made a lot of sense given that it is a slightly bitter but also sweeter citric quality to this one. So level 4, an excellent place to put that. Let's go ahead and move on to the level 3s. We just have 2 of them, and the caramel is 1. So the candied sweetness of this one is where we opted to put the caramel quality there. It's pretty strong, and I'm very happy with how intense it was throughout the entirety of this one. So having that be there at the level 3 mark, that's to kind of highlight the brown sugar quality of this one, was definitely another positive factor of this coffee. And then the final thing worth discussing, the body there at the level 3 and a little bit more medium bodied cup of coffee, and usually the case when it comes to Colombian coffees, even with this one being a geisha. So that's pretty on par with my expectations for it. So as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I will start with this. I am very happy that I enjoyed this coffee significantly more than the 006 because I really wanted to enjoy these Aviary coffees, given that there's a very rabid Aviary fan base. And if I didn't like this coffee and I had to come here and say that I didn't like this coffee whatsoever, then I was not looking forward to the backlash of that. But the honest reality is this coffee was very enjoyable. I mean, it offered such tremendous sweetness, which was the standout point for me, enough to the point where that's the other thing I wanted to highlight from this coffee. I believe it's roasted on a stronghold, and I can't quite recall any other stronghold roasters that have offered this very unique and intense level of sweetness. And for that reason, having a stronghold coffee be this intensely sweet is very interesting to me. And it's something that I had a discussion with somebody else long before we even finished the notes for this coffee, as they were also surprised just how sweet this coffee turned out. And that's been the biggest takeaway I've heard from the majority of people, is that this coffee was super sweet. And a lot of people know that a massive selling point to me on any coffee is to have it be super sweet, especially if you're going to offer excellent cleanliness to go alongside that and some fruit and floral depth. So this one hit on all 4 of the marks that I was looking for, and it presented a very enjoyable experience for this coffee roaster. Now, the only other thing that comes with that is that I hope I get an opportunity to try more of Aviary's coffees, but if I praise them and it just helps kind of add to the demand of their coffees, then there's a strong chance we won't get to anytime soon. But as far as this one goes, I'm happy I got a chance to experience it. I do think that this was an absolutely lovely coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, anybody that does enjoy their extremely sweet coffees, because I want to highlight and emphasize that if I haven't already. This one just offered such an abundance of sugary sweet qualities to it throughout the entirety of it. Outside of that, there's great depth. There's a lot of fruit qualities. There's a lot of floral qualities to it. There's a lot of brightness. There's a lot of just cleanliness to it. And for it being a more processed Colombian coffee, which is usually something I don't like either, I was also truly impressed by that, given the overall cleanliness. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Lino Rodriguez Fermented Honey Processed Colombia from Aviary Coffee. Thank you for watching.